Hello and welcome to the Trash Talk Podcast. I am your host JJ, and today I have Sergey.
Hi.
Today we will be talking about politics because
Ooh,
we'll never
damn.
make enemies talking about politics. So let's make some enemies.
Ever.
And specifically, and I said I was going to prep for this, and I didn't, so this is going to be fun. Politics hindering scientific progress.
Same thing here.
Yeah, this is the thing that happens, so we're going to talk about it. Sergey, how does politics hinder scientific progress?
From what I've seen, by usually just not understanding what they are regulating.
Yeah, it's like whenever they try to get experts on, they either disregard what they're saying, or they just get all the wrong kinds of experts from the get-go. And then you get stuff like surprise mechanics.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not like the biggest thing in terms of scientific progress, but if you want to know if a company is doing shady things, maybe don't ask that company. I mean, of course they have to testify. All that stuff, but like, maybe get some experts on the other side as well. It doesn't help that it seems that all the politicians are like old enough to be retirees, right? Like, I get that you don't necessarily want to leave the future of a country in the hands of a bunch of 20-somethings, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be in their 70s.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a middle ground.
Gotta strike a balance.
And listen, right, I'm not saying that like older people should be categorically incapable of being in government, but they shouldn't make up like the vast majority of people there. I mean, like, even the fact that, like, I mean, they're probably not all over 70, but, like, even if you say that the majority of them is over 50, that is still, like, quite an age to be in terms of, like, technology and science, right? Like, the stuff you learned in school about how the world works is already, like, 30 plus years out of date. That is assuming that the information was up to date when you learned it in school, which it usually isn't.
That's a whole separate topic, and we're gonna cover that some other time, maybe, hopefully, if we ever get to prep that.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. But yeah, no, I think the age of politicians is like a big issue in itself, right? There are like some younger politicians every now and again that you hear about, but first of all, when we say younger politicians, we're generally still talking in their 30s, which is perfectly fine. But if that is like the young politicians, that is where it becomes boring, right? Like, sure, they shouldn't also be the old guys, but like, 30 should be like, not like the youngest, but maybe like on the younger end barely, right? Like, I feel like the average age for a politician should be maybe like 40 or something, right?
Sounds about right, yeah.
You have some in their 30s, some in their 50s, some in their 40s. I mean, maybe like 45. Like, somewhere like around there. And I don't know if this is a good way to do this, but if you get like one of like the highest political positions, like presidencies and like prime ministerial positions, and like like the point is like presidents, chancellors, prime ministers, governors, right? Like everyone who's like the highest position and like maybe like the second highest as well, like vice presidents, vice chancellor, vice prime minister. That's not right. That last one doesn't sound right. But the point is that like these like really high positions, maybe we should have like a basic cognitive ability test, right? Like not like, I'm not saying like you have to take an IQ test and have to be at least like at 150 or something. I'm saying maybe like test them for Alzheimer's, like if they are all that old.
Oh yeah.
Maybe see that they're like still cognitively capable of like just the basic functioning of the office. I don't want to set the bar too high because we don't want to use the test to like cheese legitimate people out of a position. But like, make sure they're not senile. I feel like there have been a couple of high position politicians that maybe wouldn't have passed that test and maybe shouldn't have had their positions in accordance to that.
Yeah.
People constantly talking about like how maybe they should have tests for older people so that they can like just keep their driver's license until they're like 90 or something and maybe have to take a test every couple of years. But like no one's talking about politicians. Like, oh yeah, you might want to check if you can actually drive a car still, but like running a country, that's gonna be fine.
I mean, in case of driving a car, you are the only one responsible for that. But like with a country, it's different. You have like quite a lot of people.
I mean, on the one hand,
with
of
you
course,
there that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that help you out in various different ways.
On the one hand, you got that, and on the other hand, optimally, a population would not elect someone who is incapable of doing their job. I mean, in theory, in a lot of countries, there are already laws in place where, like a Congress or something akin to that can accuse the person of not being capable of doing their job, and then they can vote on that. But they are generally very careful with using that exemption, and for good reason, because that shouldn't become like a standard thing. But that also means that they oftentimes let a lot of stuff slide that maybe shouldn't. But that's also like, I'm getting into a very specific angle that I honestly didn't foresee going into, but that maybe also isn't the most relevant. So we talked about not understanding what you're legislating.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is kind of related is not really future-proofing existing... not future-proofing your legislation as you draft it, right? So, like, if you make a law that just says, like, oh yeah, this is how it has to be, and then you don't automatically include a clause like, oh yeah, like, have a relevant institution review these guidelines every 5 years to see if they're still up to date or something, then that leads to the danger of your laws lagging behind of where the science and the technology is. And if that is the case, then, I mean, you could still make new laws that replace the old ones, but it is oftentimes easier to have these procedures built into the laws. I know, in the US, I don't remember, I think in copyright law, they actually have, it might be in IP law in general, I'm not exactly 100% sure about this, but there's this thing where, like, the Library of Congress gets to, like, do a review every 5 years, I think it is, and, like, suggest changes, or exemptions where, for example, that's where, like, some of the right to repair exemptions come into place, where it's like, oh yeah, you are allowed to, like, open, like, proprietary electronics and manipulate them in ways that maybe would otherwise be considered, like, circumvention of blah, 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 but then it's allowed because it's of repair purposes, and that sort of stuff gets added onto that, but it's very limited usually.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that there are actually laws that future-proof in that way.
Yes, but they're few and far between, and usually the institutions that then end up reviewing them and updating the guidelines are also suffering from a lot of the other problems we talked about, where they're not necessarily the most in touch with the technology at times. So, and also lobbying is a huge issue.
But at least there is a system for that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely.
Okay. That could have been a fact of the week, maybe. At least for me.
Huh. I mean, to me, that was like kind of... I mean, yeah, that is true. I don't remember what law exactly it was. I don't think it was just like... I think it might have been like specifically about like the circumvention of copyright protections that get then further... because you're not allowed to use technology to circumvent copyright protections, and then you can, though, if there's like one of those couple of exceptions. There's like exceptions for like academic purposes, and then for like repair in some specific cases. And none of this is legal advice, and you should definitely look up anything specific if you want to actually know what applies to you. Because not only am I not a legal expert, but I'm like only half remembering things about this, and this is worse than a regular not legal advice. So,
yeah. Kind of another specific thing, like going back to the politicians not understanding what they are regulating. Also kind of recent is the Article 13 or 17 or like whatever it ended up being.
It used to be 13, and people generally still, I think, call it that, but I think they renumbered it to be Article 17, which is another thing that I do not like, by the way. They literally, as far as we can tell, it would appear that they might have intentionally renumbered them to confuse people voting on it because they don't know what exactly they're voting on because they're not reading every single line of every single revision of that document. So that when it turns out that Article 13 is problematic, all of a sudden it's Article 17, and people maybe then vote on Article 17 to be okay because they had not heard of issues regarding it. Maybe possibly that might have played a factor in why that was renumbered. We don't know that for certain, no, and I'm not alleging anything because, reasons.
Yeah. But yeah, that was like one of the cases where they had experts on there that they should have listened to. But as far as I can tell, and from all the info I have received on this, they more or less just plainly ignored all of them. And voted this stuff in, or even made a design for that.
Which is both not surprising and still kind of surprising because the EU of all bodies tends to be one of the best at the whole technology and consumer protection and cyber security, cyber privacy, those sort of stuff. The EU of all governmental, and I mean intragovernmental, I guess in this case, it doesn't matter. Out of all the regulatory bodies, they seem to be one of the ones that tends to be most up to date with those sort of things. But they're usually leading when it comes to internet privacy laws, and they tend to be the leading bodies when it comes to consumer protection, right to repair, that sort of stuff. The EU tends to be the best at that. That's not to say that that they can do no wrong and that they maybe should do more in some cases. And that doesn't mean that other bodies shouldn't do it just because the EU already has some of it covered. But comparatively speaking, the EU tends to be one of the better ones when it comes to that. Specifically the EU, not necessarily the member states, but then, of course, the EU laws affect the member states.
Yeah.
I think they were also the ones that were legislating on, I think it might be still ongoing, about requiring a standardized connector for charging of mobile telephones, which is going to be USB Type-C.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what the legislation exactly reads, and I'm once again worried that, and again, I don't know what it reads, maybe they have considered it, but even if they have, this would still be a good hypothetical example to talk about, so I'm gonna mention it. I'm a bit worried that they will write something every phone should have a USB-C connector, and then it's in 10 years, we're gonna use a different connector, or we want to use a different connector that's way better, and that would still be used by the entire industry, but it's not going to be possible because someone legislated that it should be USB Type-C because it was the standard at the time.
Yeah. That would be a bad case of not future-proofing laws. But I don't know if that is the case. I just heard that they are, or that someone is working on something like that.
I think it's the European Commission
on a standard connector for phones.
Something akin to that.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, that in general, that would be a pretty good idea to have.
This is one of those cases where I wouldn't even necessarily think there needs to be a government body that oversees it. I think they could literally write in the law where, every couple of years, the biggest manufacturers are allowed to change the standard if at least a certain percentage of them agrees on it or something. I wouldn't even mind that being privatized, right? Because the companies will want to have the best possible connectors, and if they can agree on one, and then everyone is bound to using the same one, then I think that's fine. I would even allow a certain overlap period generally where it's for 1 year, both the old and the new standard can be used because, you're gonna have production still, where it's we already have the plans for the phones and blah, blah, blah. But, just having some measure in which it can be updated optimally without having to completely replace the existing law, right? It's always good when you can have, a dedicated committee or, some sort of thing where you can have, an industry agreement or something where it's already in place, where it can be relatively easy pushed through with the changes, right? Because obviously you can update any given law by just making a new law that supersedes it. But optimally you'd have something that is easier and faster than the process of getting a new law on the books, right? Like getting it voted on, getting it ratified, blah, 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 because that takes a long time from first someone putting in a proposal to it then actually becoming a law. If it even does. And then you get the whole other thing, which is also a big issue, where not every issue is political, right? Just because you're deciding a policy doesn't mean it is something that has to be like split down party lines, right? Like, again, let's use the USB example, right? And let's use US politics because I know the better. And of course, now I'm just making up an example, but say the Democrats were like, oh, we don't like it that different companies have different chargers. We want consumers to be able to maybe just need one type of charger. And that's better for, like, and again, environmental reasons for packaging, because I don't have to ship with chargers. It's better for consumers for when they switch. They have other chargers that already have work, blah, blah, blah. And then the Democrats put forward a proposal, and then the Republicans reject it because it's the Democrats that put it forth. And vice versa, right? I'm not pretending that it's like one party's issue specifically, but in the US I could totally see something get shut down just because it's the other party that suggested it, even if it's a good proposal, and even if it's one that the majority of the population agrees should be made. Not everything is a partisan issue. Just wonder if
hurts so much inside when I hear of stuff like that happening.
It's like politics has become too much about politics, and that's a weird thing to say. But like, it's like that whole like politicking, like how what do you associate with politics? It's not about making laws and making laws that are best for the people. It's literally a lot of it's just jockeying for position and this law that you want that I should have no reason to disagree with. Well, I'm going to vote for it if you in turn vote for this law on my side that maybe you don't agree with. And it's like, if a law is obviously the right one, then there shouldn't be any issues with getting it through. And I find it really infuriating that it does become this whole issue, no matter what the law is. And sometimes there's legitimate disagreement, and that's fine, right? Like, if one side thinks it should be done one way and the other side thinks it should be done the other way, then sure, have political disagreement about it, negotiate, come to terms. But if it's something that your side is just disagreeing with because the other side agrees with it, don't, please.
Yeah, that's just kindergarten.
Yeah. Anything else we want to add about this? I'm going to quickly look at my points.
I had something in mind, but I forgot what I wanted to say.
I do know...
Like, while you were talking, I had, like, a point I wanted to add, but I forgot it.
Okay,
and my notes aren't specific enough to remember that.
I mean, by notes, I'm literally just meaning I'm looking at our shared notes right now, but if you come up with it, let me know. But one thing that I also want to mention is that oftentimes public perception is valued more than the actual impact of the laws, which is a tricky subject, but because obviously you shouldn't necessarily go against what the public thinks is best, but sometimes the like sort of reactionary thing where it's like, oh yeah, something bad happened, thereby we now want to disassociate from this bad thing as much as possible, even if the actual bad thing that happened isn't necessarily that related, and it's still, in the long run, I'm talking about nuclear power, okay? Like, just because one nuclear reactor explodes doesn't mean that every country needs to shut down their nuclear programs in favor of burning more coal and destroying our environment faster. I think we touched on this before, but nuclear is the safest and one of the greenest options that there is, right? Sure,
it's not the safest, but it's like one of the safest. It's very close.
And sure, right? Like, I prefer renewables. No contest, right? Like, obviously, wind, solar, great stuff. Especially because even if nuclear had no downsides, and it does, because nuclear waste needs to be stored or refined, and that's a whole another kind of worms.
Yeah.
That is a problem, but there are solutions, right? It's not an unsolvable problem, and it doesn't it is not as imminent a problem as climate change is, I would argue. Right? These, storage facilities that might not hold up forever, but we can store it there for now and then have to move it later. It works for now. I don't want to make more problems for the future, because we've seen how that worked. The boomers ruined the world and now we have to live in it. But it's something that we can deal with, and that is something that we can push towards the future if need be, whereas climate change is a very imminent problem that we have to deal with right now, meaning nuclear is preferable to coal and gas and whatnot, and yes, uranium and plutonium and whatnot is not infinite, it's also a finite resource, but we have that for now, and it stores much more energy per unit. It's what we call a stopgap solution, right? We do not want to sustain our entire power grid on nuclear, but until we can build more solar energy and more wind and build all the infrastructure and energy storage for when it's neither sunny nor windy, because that is a big issue, getting good power at night when there's no wind. At night you don't need as much power, but once it gets dark, solar panels stop working, and everyone starts turning on the lights. It's really bad. So there's already solutions being worked on for at least storing energy, especially for solar, where it's storing energy for until the sun goes up again. It's short-term storage. There are solutions for that. Those numbers also getting built up, but it takes a while until we can get a completely renewable energy plant in motion. Until then, we have nuclear reactors. We have reactants for that reactor. The only reason why Germany is shutting down their nuclear program is because of Fukushima. Which is the fact that we're still talking about
ridiculous.
It proves how it's an exception, not a rule. And also, don't build nuclear reactors on fault lines. Fukushima was just a bad idea from the get-go. Yes, right, it's a tragedy, but German reactors are a lot safer than that. And even if they weren't, it still is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. Okay, I mean, Chernobyl, Fukushima, maybe twice in a lifetime, but it's still such a small risk on a per reactor basis, and especially on a per gigawatt hour basis, that it still is preferable to destroying our environment with coal. And let's not even talk about the fact that a lot of the coal reserves in Germany are freaking brown coal, which is even worse than other types of coal in terms of environmental impact, in terms of CO2.
Oh, really?
Because it doesn't burn very cleanly.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that's it's the whole thing where it's we have our own coal, we don't need to import coal. And it's yeah, but our own coal is even worse than the one we could import. But then importing costs money, and then it has a CO2 footprint from delivery, and there are no good coal-based solutions. That's just a fact. And nuclear is manageable. It's not great, but it's the best we have. Of course, nuclear fusion would be the optimal outcome, but that technology seems to not quite be there yet. Which also, again, nuclear fission is a stopgap until we build up our renewables, or we figure out nuclear fusion. Which, I know it sounds worrying to some people because it's called nuclear, but the side product is literally helium. Which, by the way, we don't have enough of. We're running out of helium. So, it's actually a 2-for-1, because the waste product is actually something that we don't have that much of, and we are slowly running out of. Don't forget about that. And what are we using? Hydrogen. Which is the single most abundant element in the universe, and also one of the more abundant elements on Earth, because it's in fucking water.
Yeah. Though it's gonna be a long, long time till we actually have nuclear fusion.
Yes. Again, the plan A is renewable energy. And nuclear is the stopgap until our renewable production is what we need it to be. Of course, part of that is not just nuclear energy, renewable energy, it's also energy storage for when the renewable energy sources do not produce, because the trouble with them is mostly that they don't produce 24/7. So it's a lot of refurbishments on the grid, it's storage. It is optimally making our energy consumption more energy efficient, as in like our devices need less energy. We don't use redundant devices, right? Like try to have individuals be more energy conscious while having our devices be more energy efficient, reducing energy consumption in production processes and all that stuff. So that's also part of it. But like, the point is, at some point, optimally, we get to a world where we can just have all of our energy needs met by renewable energy, or at the very least, the vast majority of it. Nuclear fusion is, at some point down the line, going to be the energy of the future, because there is an energy-positive nuclear fusion that can work. It's called a sun, right? Like, we know it can work. It's just, if we can build one that's feasible and controllable by humans, and the answer seems to be, it's definitely possible, we just don't know when. And that is going to be the kind of energy that we need if we want to, like, go to the stars, all that stuff, on like a somewhat sustainable basis. I think we can manage Earth itself without nuclear fusion. But
yeah,
it's definitely something to look into. And again, helium wouldn't be a bad thing to have more of.
That is true as well. One thing I want to mention about the last point, I remembered what I wanted to say about the plug design. I think the plugs for electrical cars, like to charge them, I think that there's something similar going on there, where there is, I think it was IEEE, with in cooperation with like a lot of the big producers of electric cars and also plugs, deciding every couple of years on a standard for electric cars, what plug they gotta use.
Those sort of organizations would actually be probably the best to handle some stuff like standardization, because it's all that they do, right? IEEE, DIN.
Yeah.
There's others that I can't come up with right now.
ISO,
right. That's actually the one. I know there's at least one big one that I'm forgetting. It was literally ISO that was like thinking of but not coming up with. Yes, ISO.
Mm-hmm.
DIN is German, but they are also, I think, it's to some degree used internationally. Then IEEE, I don't know exactly. I think ISO is French. I'm not even sure.
I don't know.
ISO may refer to International Socialist Organization. That's definitely the one. No, International Organization for Standardization is an international standard-setting body composed of representatives from various national standard organizations. Okay, so it's international. Was it IEEE that I was thinking of? Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers is a professional organization for electronics, blah, 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 blah. Location is Manhattan. No. Wait, what? And ISO was headquartered in Geneva. Huh. Maybe I just got something wrong there. Maybe there's another the fourth organization that I was like half thinking of and not coming up with. Point is, there's a lot of national and international standardization organizations whose whole job is to standardize things. You can get your standards from there.
Yeah.
IEEE standardizes things such as the floating point, and ISO something like keyboard layouts, and DIN something like paper sizes. We call this, actually what's on there? Well, that's not too bad, but we call this A5. It's the German Institute for Normating A5 standard. And, yeah, it's half as big as A4. And I'm not sure if I don't actually think they're hard to find, right? You could literally define like an A50 if you wanted to, right? Like I think they're like defined intentionally because they're always half, and that's also why they have the exact shape. Because if you cut this thing in half right here, you get an A6, and you turn around, it has the exact same proportions because those standards are really cool. And honestly, I don't know why. No, actually, I was gonna say I don't know why Americans use letter paper instead of A4, but honestly, they're not that different, and they don't have the main cool advantage of A4 is the way they split. I don't think leather can do that. I don't think it keeps its proportions.
No. It's a very specific thing of A4 or like the A series of paper.
Which is why they're the best. Like... Fight me.
Yeah. True.
No, it's
I think it's like 1 to square root of 2. Like 1 plus square root of 2. I don't remember.
Yeah, something like that.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's why the A4, A5, that sort of standard is arguably the coolest, but honestly I don't care that strongly. The point is it's standardized. And standardization for stuff like that is good. Right? Standardization for most things that we use in our daily life, standardization is a good thing. Right? Because it means that a product is reliable if it's always the exact same. And then if it's across countries and across different devices it's standardized, it's also good. For electronics in particular, all of the connectors we use have standardized forms, and that's really good, right? Like, it would really suck if you, like, bought a graphics card from a company and they didn't have HDMI on it because they don't support that, right? And it's like, imagine if NVIDIA and AMD had different freaking screen connector standards. I mean, they're probably be people making up like converter cables, but still, right? Like the idea that like, now AMD graphic cards are better. Like NVIDIA used to be better, but now AMD is kind of, not really. Like kind of. I think it's more of a processor thing where AMD is now head of Intel and Intel used to be head. But just imagine now you want to buy an AMD graphics card because it is more price efficient and they're definitely more energy efficient. Oh fuck, but my screen doesn't support it. That is what we call anti-competitive practices, which is why standardization is good, because it keeps companies honest, because you can just switch to their competitors without having to throw out all of your electronics.
And now, again, back to like the second point about like green energy. I think there was a thing where politicians plan to like restrict or like regulate wind power much more. And one of the reasons was that like they kill quite a lot of birds.
Okay, see
each year.
That is a decent reason, at least.
Yeah, though, like they usually just put the plain number there, like just this is the total amount of birds they kill each year.
Yeah.
Which is quite a large number, don't get me wrong, but like statistically speaking, it's really not as big a deal as they make it out to be.
The question is it worse than airplanes? Because let me tell you, no one's going to cancel airplanes over birds.
Yeah.
Other thing.
I didn't remember what it was about airplanes, but like just windows in houses. They kill like 10 times or like more than that, the amount of birds.
Yeah. Large spinny thing they're probably going to keep away from. Especially if it's really windy. I don't think that birds are necessarily going to stay down because of wind, but like, I'm sure like they're not going to go near like a fast-moving thing while it's really windy because they probably know that's dangerous. I was going to say, right, you know what's killing birds? Global warming. You know how birds hatching and insects hatching are both partially determined by time and partially by temperature, and there was a thing. I don't remember exactly how it worked, where, like, the time frames between the birds hatching and insects hatching was offset because of climate change, and so there was a lot more insects around of a specific type because the birds that would eat them were hatching later. So, I think it was mosquitoes who were, like, even bigger of a problem somewhere because, like, and also, like, stuff about how, it's also a height thing where, like, if the peaks of mountains get warmer, then mosquitoes go higher. And, it's a whole thing. Like, global warming doesn't just mean it gets too hot and the ice caps melt and all that stuff, which is bad. It also, it shifts certain things around, like, when certain animals hatch and they might misalign where they're previously aligned. And if they misalign, then that can lead to one becoming overabundant, one losing its food source. So, like, yeah, it's possible that your birds might just also not get enough to eat because what they were gonna eat is now hatching too early, too late, and that is also a problem. So, like, a couple of birds dying because of windmills might be worth the risk to prevent all the species on Earth, well, not all of them, but like a good chunk of them dying
really
or being significantly affected by climate change. Right? Like, habitats get shrunk down, wildfires kill animals, not just windmills, wildfires. You know what wildfires are caused by? Heat. You know what exacerbates heat? Global warming.
Yeah.
Halftime show? Facts?
Facts. Yeah. Let's do the facts.
I mean, I was just spitting a bunch of facts, but I mean, I was also saying a lot of things that, like, half remembered, so, like, you know, details might be a bit wishy-washy.
Yeah.
But climate change is bad. Like, that is a fact. And wildfires are getting worse, and floodings are getting worse, and they're gonna get worse, and they're not gonna be as newsworthy next time around. I literally said that to my mom. Like, the news were on, right? And they were talking about, like, this one German town that got flooded, and they're still talking about it. And it happened, like, a month or two ago at this point. And they're still every now and again talking about it. And I'm like, you know, that this is gonna happen a lot more now. And they're gonna not talk about it every time it's happening. It's gonna happen, like, very soon. It's a huge national crisis, and it's not gonna be when it becomes a more regular thing. Speaking of...
Yeah.
Actually, this is a point I want to make that has nothing to do with anything that we just talked about, but I just want to mention it. We are also now for like a week or so talking in the news in Germany about the fact that a guy in Norway killed like 5 people in a supermarket with a bow and arrow. Right? It's a huge news story. Because someone killed multiple people in one instance in Norway. And then I was like, that reminds me of a thing that happened a while back, a couple of years back. There was also someone killing a bunch of people in Norway. And like, the news anchor in the radio was literally said it in as well. Like, oh yeah, that of course brings back memories of what happened 10 years ago. And I'm like, oh, that's been 10 years. It's like, there's been 2 mass killings in Norway in the last 10 years. And both times there were huge news stories for weeks on end. Meanwhile, in the US, there's like multiple a week in one town. And no one gives a crap. And if you don't think your gun laws are fucked up in the United States and that somehow that more guns are better, you're wrong. As shown by the fact that, I mean, listen, right? I know Norway has a significantly smaller population, but like twice in 10 years is not the same thing. You can pick any area of the US probably, and with an equivalent population, and it's going to be worse. Whatever you believe about your gun laws, not whatever you believe, but if you think that more guns stops those things from happening, you are objectively wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, this guy didn't have a gun. He had a bow and arrow. Listen, right? It's almost kind of impressive if you can manage to kill multiple people with a bow and arrow in one environment. Though, I'm not saying it's a good thing that it happened or that he was cool for doing it, but like, so kind of impressive. And also, because it's impressive means that not everyone can pull it off, right? Like, anyone can kill people with a gun. That was that rant.
One thing though, like a couple of years ago, I actually, just out of pure interest, compared the chance for a school shooting between US and Germany. And I don't know if I did it wrong somehow, but the chances turned out to be really, really similar. Like within a couple of, I don't know what the difference was, but it was like really, really small comparatively speaking.
I definitely remember there being a couple of school shootings in Germany. For a while, there was a thing that like kept happening, that kept coming into the news, and then it stopped being a news story. That doesn't mean it stopped happening, or at least I don't remember hearing it as often. But every now and again, you would get like one a year or something. You'd have to.
No, it's much rarer than that. It's like one every like couple of years, like closer to 5-ish, I think.
Really?
But it's been quite a long time since I've done that, so
I mean,
kind of.
You definitely hear I mean, the school shooting specifically, you also don't hear of that often in the United States, but you'd have to first have good stats on that in the first place, and then I guess you'd have to either compare to the number of schools or to the number of students. And then
I compared it to the number of schools.
Yeah, and then there's always a possibility that German schools just have more students per school, at which point you're still less likely to get shot in a school shooting, even if you are as likely to have a shooting at your school. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. You have to look into a lot of things. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if the criteria were strapped different. But whereas in the US, it's only considered a school shooting if at least 5 people died because of a gunshot wound, and in Germany, it's like, as soon as someone gets attacked with a weapon, it's like classified as such. But it's like, I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening, but you always have to be very careful that you are working with the same data sets. And then, again, it's like, is any given student as likely to be shot? Is any given school as likely to be shot up? And then in the US, I think it's also that there's probably a bigger difference, like, geographically and, like, demographically. Like, if you're, like, in, like, the city center of, like, a poorer city in the US, it's, like, very dangerous, whereas if you're in, like, a elite private school, there's virtually no risk. Where in Germany, I could see it being a lot more even.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, there are private schools in Germany, I think, but, like, most people go to public schools in Germany. It's not as much the case in the US. I'm not sure for primary education, it might all be public schools. I'm not even sure. But, like,
I think it has to be.
I'm not 100% sure, but it's
I'm not sure,
possible.
yeah.
And then, so there's also other factors where it's like, I might be as likely to get shot in school as the average American, which I doubt, but it may be. But then if you compare, I doubt that, because then you would say that the safer places in the US would be safer than the average place in Germany, which sounds wrong, but it's very possible. But and that is,
it's just also like, just keep in mind, it's just really just school shootings specifically.
Yeah, that's the
not
other
just
thing, right?
shootings in general.
That's also, I think, a thing actually, where it might be that it's just more non-school shootings happening other places for sure, as in the US specifically, because it seems like the kind of thing that, because if there's a shooting in a school in Germany, it's probably because a child managed to steal a gun from their parents or something, where in the US, anyone can really basically have a gun. But it's, honestly, we can talk about this all day, and we have been for a while now.
Yeah.
There is no way for us to get any good answers on this without doing some research. I would be interested in seeing those stats, though.
I might have to redo that again.
Yeah. So, what is the fact of the week?
My fact of the week is about pocket watches and wristwatches. Like, when wristwatches became a thing. Like, how, rather. So, apparently, wristwatches only really became a thing because of World War I. Because soldiers needed to coordinate their attacks much, much more, and much more based on time.
Yeah.
And just fumbling around in pockets for a pocket watch was just not feasible.
Yes.
Like, that could be a difference between, like, life and death.
Yeah, I think I might have heard of that, like, on the side before. Yeah, that's interesting, though, for sure.
Yeah, and then, like, when civilians saw that thing, or, like, that soldiers were wearing watches on their wrist, they kind of started copying that, and it somehow became a trend, I guess.
I mean, you could make the same arguments for civilians as you could for soldiers. It's not as necessary, but it still, in a way, is more convenient to just be able to, rather than like, pull it out.
Yeah.
I think there was also, I don't know if that was ever a big thing, but I know there's watches that are both. Like, you can either, like, attach a string to it, make it a pocket watch, or, like, put it in an armband and have it be a wristwatch. So, like, the watch is intentionally made in such a way that you can use it as both.
And there's also an article by the New York Times back in 1916, where they kind of more or less jokingly like have written about that thing.
It's always funny to look at old newspapers when they're talking about specifically progress, like technological progress and like trends and that sort of stuff, because they're often hilariously wrong. Not always. And the thing is, right, you're probably going to find an article that is spot on and one is the exact opposite, right? It's like one of them is like, oh, this is going to be the next big thing, and the other one's going to be like, oh, this is just a phase. It's going to like, but you can always find the one where they're like so wrong, and it's hilarious to read in after the program. It's like, oh yeah, wristwatches, and the internet was a big one. Like, there was always those outlets reporting where it's like, oh yeah, like, this is just a fad, it's gonna not be a thing, like, people are, like, it's just a toy, that people are gonna get sick of it very quickly, and it's just gonna fall out of use, and it's gonna only be used for, like, specific circumstances. It's like, no, it's so ubiquitous, they could not have foreseen that. And it's kind of wild to look back at them and be like, how could you ever think this was not gonna be a thing? It's like, people didn't really understand what you could do with it, and, like, of course, right, you wouldn't necessarily know, and it wasn't as accessible, and...
I'm gonna read 2 cents from that.
Sure, go ahead.
Until recently, the bracelet watch has been looked upon by Americans as more or less of a joke. Vaudeville artists and moving picture actors have utilized it as a fun maker, as a silly-ass fad.
Moving picture makers is just one of those things that is just like really puts me back like that just like really puts me in the mindset of like what time frame they were talking about. Yeah, it's like, I mean, obviously, right, we said World War One, but like the like entertainment side of things, like I always forget like how new the idea of a movie, and then like, you know, you get into like the talkies, and then you get into like color film, and it's like how recent a lot of that is. I mean, color television, I think television, I think, is like a 60s, 70s type of thing. Color movies, I think, first started appearing around the 40s, 50s, more 50s probably. It's like, and like, and like from first appearing to becoming like the standard is also like another whole story. It's wild. The one that always gets me, and we talked about this before, right? 1902, the Wright brothers flight.
Yeah.
Planes?
Like, dude.
Planes seem like they've always been there kind of thing. I mean, obviously, like, you don't think of, like, medieval times or Romans or, like, anything like that as, like, having had planes, but, like, once you get into something that feels more modern, you did it, like, 120 years ago, planes weren't a thing? 120 years ago, planes weren't a thing. But was it 1902? That sounds wrong, actually.
I think it was 1902.
I think so, too. Oh, yeah, no, that just checks out. Yeah, because, as we all know, What's-Her-Face was born in 1902 and is now 119 years old. And maybe still alive. Kane Tanaka. Let's see. And is the world's oldest verified living person. Yep.
Nice. I kind of like how we're checking back on her, like, every week.
Well, not quite every week, but yeah.
Yeah, close to.
Lucille Rondon also still alive. I like how they actually have a Wikipedia actually has a citation. It's specifically one of where she survived COVID. Yeah. Did I mention Lucille Rondon survived COVID? Yeah.
What?
Okay, that was my fact of the week one week, but you weren't there for that. I had Smokey on as a guest that week. Lucille Rondon, the second oldest person in the world, had COVID asymptomatically, and then because it was asymptomatic, she also survived. Which means that she's not just the second oldest living person in the world, but she's also the oldest ever verified person to have survived COVID. Granted, there was only one other candidate for being older, but yeah.
That's crazy.
Oh, it was 1903, by the way. When Kane Tanaka was born, and then the Wright brothers flight must have been, so she was born in January, and I think the flight was in December of that same year. The Wright brothers flights, yes. First powered flight.
The classical off by one.
December 13th, 1903. Sorry, where were we? What did you say?
A classical off by 1 error.
Computer science. My fact of the week pertains to entertainment. Hey, a thing we just talked about. More specifically, it pertains to music, and even more specifically, it pertains to one particular song. Are you familiar with the song My Way by Frank Sinatra?
Maybe. I gotta hear it first, but
Well, this is
I know
not
the
that,
guy.
This is not that part of the it's like his most famous song.
Okay.
So that song actually takes its instrumentals from an older song known as Comme d'habitude, which is French, it means as usual or as per usual. Originally sang by Claude François. In 1967, I think it was Frank Sinatra's manager or something like that. Like his manager is something akin to that. One of his producers, I don't know, something around that, who heard the song on the radio and thought that it would be a good song for Sinatra, and then they wrote English lyrics for it, for Sinatra to sing.
Oh, damn. Nice.
It literally says in the Common Aptitude article, it says it became song that became My Way, Frank Sinatra's signature song. So yeah, it is the one he's most associated with. And apparently, what I saw when I just opened the article earlier, mostly because I just didn't want to forget the name Claude François, because while it is the most French name ever, no, actually it would have been the most French name ever if it was Jean-Claude François, because if your name doesn't start with Jean, are you even French? You know how they all call like Jean-Claude, Jean-Pierre, Jean-Jacques, you know, like...
yeah.
And apparently, he actually also asked for some... François accepted, but asked an underlying theme of a couple in a strained relationship to be included in reference to his recent breakup with fellow French singer France Gall, which I didn't know about that part until I just opened that up. Of course, France Gall, famous for singing Ella Ella, and various other things. I think she was generally well known, which once was my song of the week. But that is my fact, and that brings us to the halftime show.
Ooh.
Which we're gonna keep a little bit short because the first topic and the fact of the week segment ended up being very bloated because I get sidetracked easily. So this is called Higher Lower, where we ask if things are higher or lower. Well, we look at what is more Google searches. Oh, this data is. We should have probably looked at this earlier. This data is based on global monthly searches in 2017. Which is probably when the game was made. They probably just ripped it once and then never updated it.
Yeah.
Or updated it, like, periodically, but, like, that's 4 years ago. So, Sergey, which has more searches? The Victoria Falls with 165,000 or Alzheimer's?
Probably Alzheimer's. Gonna go higher.
You think you have Alzheimer's and then you look it up. And then you look it up. And then you look it up. It's a bad joke, but it works.
Yeah.
Turkey. More or less than 1.2 million.
It's a popular travel destination.
That it is.
So, probably higher?
It's the exact same.
Oh, damn.
Shaanxi earthquake.
Never heard of it. Lower.
Yeah, same. 1,000.
Oh, damn.
Taylor Swift.
Heard of her before, so it's probably more than 1,000 searches.
I mean...
per month.
Okay, so there's a couple things here, right? First of all, I mean, I don't have to see what it says. I'm gonna pick higher, right? Like, second of all, I was low-key expecting you to be like, I never heard of her. I don't know, maybe higher? Like, yeah, no, she's like really famous. Taylor Swift or Marcus Persson. I mean, Notch. It says Notch. Also, his last name was Person, which sounds so fake, but I've said that before. It's spelled differently, but still.
Yeah.
Like, Person.
Way lower?
I would think so.
I could see it being higher.
So, You said lower though, right? You going with that or?
Yeah, I'm gonna go lower, but I could reasonably see it being higher.
That was so much lower. It's unbelievable. I mean, okay, listen, him being like that low, I mean,
it was 2017.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Like bad thing. Like I think a couple years prior, he was in the news much more. Like
Fair
when
enough.
Microsoft took over.
So, Nacho Columbus. Christopher Columbus.
I want to say higher, but I'm not sure.
Final answer?
I'm gonna go lower.
No way. That was a bad guess, I would say. Then again, he was also lower than I would expect it, but that's so was Notch. So I'm gonna go, and then we're gonna both go one more time, but we're gonna go somewhat quickly. Iris, rocks, or anxiety. Anxiety is higher. People have that. A lot of people have that. Teeth whitening lower. It's a cosmetic procedure. Who cares? I mean, a lot of people obviously care, but like Coachella. Okay, you look for that if you want like tickets or something. I could see that being. It's pretty big. It's high. No, it's not. That was way. Okay, just because I know of something existing doesn't mean it's okay. Yeah, okay, okay. That was probably a bad pick. Sergey, Poor or Max Martin?
Never heard of that guy. Lower.
Swedish music producer, has worked with a lot of celebrities, but not very well known necessarily. General Electric.
That seems like something you'd Google like couple times, maybe, so higher.
I mean, I would say higher, probably. Yeah, that's... Renault Clio. Remember,
that seems pretty specific. I don't know. That I just don't know cars. Doesn't tell me anything.
I mean, I feel like I've seen commercials for this car in the past, but not recently, which is why I was saying 2017. It's probably going to be higher in 2017 than it is now. I just don't know how high it is going to be in general.
And it's a specific car.
Yes.
Gonna go lower.
That seems reasonable, but anyone that wants to buy one would search for it, yeah. It's like, specific search terms in a way have an advantage. Okay, you scored 2 as I did last time, you scored 5 in the first one, so if I get 5 or more, I'm better than you. In every conceivable way. And if I don't, then...
Yes.
I'm still better than you, but except in that. No. No, I'm joking. Oh god. Girl with a pearl earring, very famous painting, or crabs. Such a weird generic search term.
The ultimate evolution form.
Yes, but yes.
Crabs.
I get one higher and it's correct. Not everything evolves towards crabs, but certain species that live in crab-like habitats tend to look like crabs because they live in crab-like habitats. It's very well adapted for the particular environment. It's a whole thing. Rocky. Okay, this one is tricky, right? Because yes, popular, but also like it's one of those things where like a lot of people are probably going to search it over time, but in any given month of 2017,
But does it have more than crabs?
I'm gonna go lower, and that's I feel like either one is risky. It's so fucking close. Okay, fair enough.
It is really, really close.
This is like the second or third time in a row that you're better than me at this, which is weird because I used to be way better at this than you, and you have definitely gotten a lot better. But it almost feels like I've also gotten worse somehow.
Somehow, yeah. I've just been lucky.
That's what they all say. Okay, next one, open-ended question. Open-ended questions. Courtesy of conversationstartersworld.com, by which I mean we're just using them. We didn't ask. And well, I mean the whole courtesy of is
for next time.
Provided by
like just for the joke.
send him an email and ask for permission?
Yeah. Like, just do the whole thing, but like, we actually asked this time.
Maybe. So how important do you think self-improvement is?
Like, theoretically, that's kind of one of the most important things, isn't there?
Yes.
Isn't it?
I think there's two ways of looking at this. One is like the whole like self-improvement like niche, like the whole like, you know, like books are written about it, people make videos about it, like that sort of thing. Where it's like a very specific type of self-improvement. And then it's just improving as a person in general. I think always improving is important, right? Like it is arguably one of the more important things in life. You want to be, you want to be better when you go to bed than when you wake up. Maybe not literally, because I have absolutely no energy when I get to bed, or at least generally, because that's the reason I go to bed. But you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So that, I would say, is kind of important, but a lot of the like self-improvement space online is also a lot about like productivity and that sort of stuff, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but can also be overdone, right? Like
it gets toxic,
toxic
really,
exactly.
really quick.
And so there I would say, how important is it? Only important to a degree. Like to a certain point and no further. And that is one of those things where like a lot of, like when you hear the term self-improvement, I'm always a bit cautious, right? When like something's advertised as self-improvement related. I'm always like, take it with a grain of salt. But like, improving yourself in general is good, right? You want to, optimally, you'd want to become more aware of your faults. You want to correct those. You want to learn new things. Never stop learning, right? I mean, in a way, like the human being is built in a way where he can't ever stop learning. But obviously, there's still different degrees, right? Like, to which you can do that. And I think it is almost optimal to be, a lifelong learner, as they say. Of course, so again, I tend to have focused a lot recently on the whole language side of things. But yeah, I also love just generally watching like informative videos on YouTube and stuff like that, which is kind of weird because I don't watch that many actual documentaries. But I just
same.
I kind of just like learning interesting things, which is also one of the main reasons why we have this Fact of the Week segment, right? It's like to share interesting information with people that we have learned, because we find so much interesting shit, and like half the time I don't even think of to put it up as a Fact of the Week, and then I'll just mention it on site somewhere else. But like that's kind of like a big part. And I mean, that's also why a lot of the podcast topics are so random. I mean, sometimes it's like, we want to talk about this thing. Sometimes it's like, oh, we don't have anything to talk about. Like, let's come up with something fun to do. And sometimes it's like, oh, this is an interesting thing that I just really want to get out there. So,
Yeah.
What will the future of war look like?
How far into the future are we looking?
Yeah, that's the question,
like
right?
World War 3 or 4?
Yeah, what is it? World War 3 will be fought with nukes, and World War 4 will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah, something like that. Probably shouldn't have dropped that. Anyway.
So, in my personal preference, there is hopefully less war in the future. In the perfect world, there would be no war at all. There would be no such thing as a future of warfare. But realistically, that seems unlikely.
I wouldn't really call that perfect, though. But
I mean, a world is not perfect because there is no war. But for a world to be perfect, there would have to be no war, I would think. At least in the way we understand it now. I mean, a perfect world should definitely have conflict, but preferably not violent conflict.
I don't know if I agree 100% there, but like, yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I do mostly agree with you.
Like, what will it actually look like? I mean, the first world countries, the developed countries will get more and more sophisticated technology that is going to be able to more effectively and more efficiently and in larger numbers kill people. Meanwhile, other parts of the world are going to more slowly catch up, which leads to further improving on the power that our developed nations already have. Now, we are already, for all intents and purposes, in charge. And that's not necessarily going to change in that way, but it's just going to be further exacerbated, and it is further going to put power into the hands of those that have money and technology, meaning governments and the more scary opportunity, possibly corporations. Not a huge fan of governments all around, especially when it comes to the governments just waging war on people, but corporations seem even worse. So
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall,
at least you have some form of democracy with governments.
Yes, that is true. But we've also seen that, in theory, democratically electing someone is only worth it if the military is then also willing to listen to them, for example, because, I mean, there's not like as much of a problem. Again, in developed nations, that's usually a thing that works very well, and it's set up in that way, but you have other countries, especially in the developing world, like, I feel like it happens a lot in, like, South America, and, I mean, in Africa as well, in, like, the third world countries, like, where, like,
might be
there'll be democratic elections, and then, like, the military leaders are still loyal to the previous leadership, and then there'll be a military coup, and either the military will be in charge or the previous leadership will be back in charge. It's tricky.
Yeah.
And I think a big one is that just the future of war will be probably even more uneven, right? Where it's like, you've had those war. I mean, it's tricky because, like, we're probably, hopefully, not gonna just, like, nuke countries like Afghanistan, right? But, like, the way that the war in Afghanistan worked also just was horrible in every conceivable way. But I mean, there were worse ones, but that sort of thing, seems like it will never quite stop, but I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like war in the future will look much, much more digital.
Yes.
Like, without even any physical violence at all in some instances.
Yeah, I can see to some degree that happening, again, if first world countries are fighting each other, how there could be, like, a thing where, like, you're shooting each other's drones down, you're sabotaging each other's electronics, like, that sort of thing, where I doubt there's ever going to be no casualties in the war, but where that definitely becomes less emphasized. But again, like, if you're trying to fight a group in like a less developed nation, and, you know, they are showing up with, like, World War II era guns, and you're showing up with modern drones, then it's just going to be a bloodbath. And the thing is, optimally, in that sort of an uneven scenario, the one side that is clearly underpowered will surrender, and there won't be a bloodbath, but realistically we know that oftentimes, if people think that what they're fighting for is worth fighting for, they will fight to the bitter end, and that's what I was saying earlier with, like, how if the power gap between the militaries in the world keeps growing, which I think it is growing, I don't have the exact stats, but it seems like it would be the case, then a lot of the conflicts against those smaller, less developed nations are just going to get even bloodier in some ways on that one side. Especially because oftentimes both the leadership and the civilian population in the more developed countries doesn't care as much, right? Again, like, Afghanistan's a great example, right? Whereas, like, if, like, US soldiers or German soldiers or other EU members, like, whoever was there, right? If they die, that is going to be seen as a huge tragedy. But, like, if, like, Taliban members are getting, like, shot, even by the dozens by the Western troops, most people in the West are not going to care, which is in and of itself a problem, right? Because we should always care if we're killing human beings, whether they're on the other side of a conflict or not. And, I mean, of course, the military people themselves can only care so much because it's a war, but the idea where we're willing to allow these sort of wars, and we are building more sophisticated killing technologies that the other side just doesn't have access to. It's just a problem where it seems like this could become a big problem. So far, it doesn't seem to have been, as far as I'm aware. But I don't know what more to say, but I'm just repeating my points, but I feel like they are solid points. I mean, if someone has like counter arguments, I'm definitely open to hearing them, but as from what I have seen in the world, that seems to be the way things are going.
Does make sense.
What strategies do you use to make big decisions?
I just put them off for as long as possible.
Isn't that true? I mean, there's really two ways that I go about them, right? I either overthink them or I try not to overthink them. Neither one is really great. Because if I'm like, don't overthink this, then you'll end up making decisions relatively quickly, which is good, but they will pretty much always be suboptimal. But then, if you do try to like put as much thought into it as possible, then you end up making a good decision at the end, but oftentimes the entire process is not the best it could be. And I try to find a balance, and it's really hard. And yes, oftentimes it ends up with just like, oh my god, big decision, I'll think about it later. And so that's why the overthinking is even worse, because I'll be like, okay, I know I want to consider this aspect, that aspect, like I want to do some research in this and do that. Whenever I say I want to do research, that's a bad sign. Because more often than not, I will put that off because I don't like researching. So it's that whole thing. It's like, oh yeah, I want to do research and that. Is like, generally, depending on what type of decision it is, I try to ask other people who would know what a good decision in that field would look like, right?
Yeah.
Not like necessarily a big life decision, but I remember when I was looking into electronics and stuff, I was, for example, asking you, because I know that you were, at least at the time, looked more into that matter already than I had, so I know that you are generally a good person to ask for that sort of stuff. And so I'll just ask someone and like who knows better, like here is a decision I'm making, here's why I'm making it, and what do you know about that? That's always a good one for me. Like, get advice from people that know better.
Yeah.
But it's like, what do I want to do for work? Where do I want to live for the rest of my life? I mean, moving around is always an option, but like, where do I want to spend the next chunk of my life? What do I want to do for a living? I don't know, and I can't just ask someone because like that's a decision at the end of the day I have to make that decision, and I just don't know, and that's kind of scary. But also, I feel like I'll figure something out.
That decision off for like the past year.
Yeah.
Or more, actually.
I have
2.5-ish.
See, I can justify putting it off because I'm still in college, but also I should be doing more for college because I should probably be done by now, which is the other thing. It's like, as long as I'm in college, I don't have to make a job decision, right? And how did I decide what to do with college-related stuff? Like, well, I graduated high school. Most people that do that go to college, especially in Europe, where it's really cheap to go to college. Okay, so I'm going to college. Well, what am I going to study at college? Well, I was at computer science at school. I had one friend at the time who was also doing computer science. I was already interested in the subject. It was already one of my favorite subjects in school. And you didn't have to have a grade requirement to get in there. What university I'm going to? Well, the local one, right? It's like, a lot of those decisions have like the obvious answer. And it's like, that's what I went with, right? I'm studying computer science at the local college because I like computer science and the local college is local. I can still live with my parents, which is convenient because I don't have to get a job.
Yeah. It's like just like going with the flow kind of thing.
Yes. I do that too much, for sure. And I know that once I'm done with college, I will have to start applying for jobs. Which then, again, brings up the questions, what jobs exactly, and where? And both of those are pretty big points for me right now, because I don't know. Now, the where part is fun, because I think what I might just do is when I figure out what kind of jobs I want to apply for, I might just apply everywhere, right? Like, just anywhere I could reasonably work, right? like EU is already like, you know, Schengen area. Like I could just literally just apply for a job and show up there one day.
Yeah.
Other places, I would have to maybe figure out visa stuff, but I might still apply to some jobs over there if like getting a work visa is somewhat easy. And it's like, I might literally just, I don't know yet. I have not made any decisions on that, but I might literally just apply for as many jobs as possible in terms of what the kind of jobs that I want to do. I'll just apply to as many everywhere as possible because in theory, I'm geographically flexible, right? I do not own a house. I can just move, right? I own a car, which like if it's within Europe, I can just drive to wherever I'm going to live. And if I move to another continent, I'll probably just get a new one because let's face it, I probably get a new one soon anyways. That's a other issue. Like used cars are it's not fair to say they're not that expensive, but like also like they don't appreciate the value that much, right? So I can just get rid of my current one and get a new one that's of a similar quality without losing much money. And it's probably easier than getting it on a ship and getting it put over to a different continent.
Oh yeah.
Like how do I make big life decisions? I mean, as I said, for the most part, I just don't, right? Like I just put it off until a decision is made for me, or go with whatever the path of least resistance is, which is not a good way to do it. I still kind of like the idea of just literally just sending applications all over Europe and just like seeing where I end up. Because again, like I don't have to make a decision that way, right? I just get whatever the best like place that actually wants me, and I'll just go there. I know I can learn a language in a relatively reasonable amount of time. If I'm applying to a job, I'm probably just going to apply where, at least in the work environment, I'm going to be doing fine with German, English, or French. And if then the local language where I will end up living is a different one, I'll just learn it. It ain't that hard. It's going to take a while, but it's not hard. And
bro, especially if you're living in a country that's speaking that language primarily.
Because you can't really avoid exposure as much, though people have managed. Living in expat communities is not a good idea. That's, by the way, like that's just a life tip for everyone. If you move to a different country where the different language is spoken, don't move to an area where a bunch of other expats live and then immediately form a community with them and never talk with anyone that's actually from the country. Because people have managed to live in a country without speaking the language for years, sometimes decades. And in theory, there's no problem with that, but if you want to move somewhere, learn the fucking language. Seriously.
It's really not that hard.
Not only does it seem like a common courtesy to just do that because, you know, if you're living in someone's country, just learn the language. And second of all, it's gonna make your life easier. There are going to be situations where learning the language is helpful. You know, if you want to, like, call for, like, a new phone contract or something, right? Like, there are going to be situations where you're not going to have any other option than doing it in that language. I mean, maybe phone contracts is not a good example. Programs that do have international support in English, but still.
Well, like, especially if you don't know English, like, man.
If you're watching this and you don't know English, learn English. I mean, I get the point that you're making. I know you're not specifically.
My parents, to like an extent, especially my mother, like she barely speaks German, and like no English at all. It's really bad.
I mean, admittedly, German is more important for her than English, but I mean, wait, you've been living in this country for, let's say, 15 years?
That's actually pretty spot on. Yes.
I mean, I did the math. You said you were 6 years old when you came over. You should be 21 round about now.
Yes.
So I just did the math. But yeah, 15 years, right? Like, that's plenty of time to learn language.
Especially living in the country where it is primarily spoken.
Yes. I would argue that you can
almost exclusively
learn most languages to a reasonable level in 2 years if you're somewhat dedicated. Now, if the language is very different from your own, it might be to a lower level. It might take a little bit longer, but like even if you're like a monolingual English speaker, you're learning Japanese, you can probably manage to live a life in the country within 2 years to a point where you can get around, and you can probably be reasonably eloquent in 3 or 4 years. And that is like a relatively extreme example. If you're an English speaker and you're learning French or Spanish, you can probably live in the country without much issue within a year or less, depending on how much time you spend into it. And after 2 years, you're going to be more or less fluent. I can almost guarantee it. It's just, you have to apply yourself. You have to actually go out of your way to try to learn the language. You have to get as much exposure to language as humanly possible, optimally. As much as humanly possible is not necessarily needed, but a couple of hours a day if you really want to, if you want to move to a country and do all of your grocery shopping and everything in the language within a couple of months, then yeah, you want to spend a couple hours every day.
Just turn on the TV and watch.
Yeah. And hey, if you're if you're ironing your clothes, just put it on in the background. You know?
Yeah.
Put on the radio, put on the TV. It's better than nothing. Is listening to some sound, listening to news or something while doing everything else, while doing your household chores, going to be the best way to learn? No. Is it better than not doing it? Yes. That has happened a lot now, but we're getting into the whole just explaining how to learn language stuff. We should just make a dedicated language learning channel at some point. Apparently I can't stop
just
talking about it. Just
reiterate the same 5 points every video.
That's the thing, right? I mostly say the same things, but the important thing is, most of what I tend to say in these sort of podcast environments is what are the single most important points, right? The 3 or 4 most important points in learning a language, and they just happen to always be the same because they don't change.
Yeah.
Learn the script. That's one that I don't usually say, but it's start with learn the script early on. Obviously, if you're learning Spanish and you're an English speaker, you know the script, right? There's a little letter called Enya. It has a little line over it, otherwise it's an N. But for the most part, you know the script. But if you're learning, especially if you're learning something like Russian, Arabic, Korean, those are easy. Japanese, Mandarin, Cantonese, those are harder because they use the freaking Hanzi, Kanji, whatever you want to call them. But that is trickier, okay? I'll give you that. But otherwise, especially if it's not a pictogram, a pictographic language, a syllabary, whatever. If it's just...
Yeah, I don't know what the technical term for that is.
But if it's just an alphabet or an abjad, something that works relatively simply, but it's just this corresponds to that sound sort of a thing, then just learn it. Because reading in the language is going to be incredibly helpful in learning the language. That has to do with life decisions, but oh yeah, you should make the decision to learn language. Kind of wild, actually. It's another one of those where learning a language seems like a big life decision in a way. To a lot of people it would, but I just kind of did it.
Yeah, it's really not that big of a deal as people make it out to be.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of time investment.
Yes, and especially consistency.
As most things are.
You can learn just about anything if you put a little bit of time into it and do it regularly. For language learning, I would recommend doing it daily.
Yep.
And I would recommend putting in at least half an hour. I think
I like the next question.
I don't...
Because
that's the next question. Let's do the next question because we kind of talked about that already a little bit, so let's just do that to get it out of the way. What are some of your plans for the future?
I like how the question assumes that I have plans for the future.
I want to finish my bachelor's degree and probably get a master's degree. And then I want to get a job, I guess, unless somehow magically this is my job, which I guess I will still have a job then. And I want to get a place of my own after the college stuff, which if I do a master's degree, that's at least 2 years in the future, right? That's the other thing, right? It's not that proximate, but I'm going to get a place of my own, I'm going to get some sort of somewhat steady income stream to both support that place and other lifestyle expenses. But I don't have anything concrete, right? As I said, I literally don't know, and maybe don't even care all that much, in which country I'll live. I mean, there is definitely certain countries I wouldn't want to live in, but it's not like one specific country that I definitely want to live in. So that's why I said, like, I might literally just send applications, like, all across Europe, and, like, maybe even some other countries where it's, like, reasonably easy to live as a worker there, and just see what I can do.
But wait, don't forget about, like, remote work.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah, like, the thing is, what I feel like, and this is of course a gutsy move when you've never lived on your own before, but I totally feel like if I could get, like, a job in, I don't know, Norway, France, Spain, right? Like, I would totally go and live there. Like, I do not have a problem with that. I mean, up north, better than down south, because, they speak English up north, but I like, listen, right? I would live in rural Spain or Portugal, or Italy, or something, where, like, no one speaks English. Like, I would totally do that.
Yeah. Also, like, purely just for learning the language.
I know, totally. Right? Like, that is the bonus of that's the thing with, like, the international job application thing, where it's like, on the one hand, it's an advantage if I already know the language. On the other hand, if I don't know the language, I get to learn the language. I mean, if I do know the language, I get to learn another language. It's not like I'm gonna not learn a language, but, like,
yeah,
it's gotta be easier if you live in a place. I low-key thought about if I should just, like, try to get a job in France just to get my French to be, like, really good. But I don't have any concrete plans to do that. And again, I probably still want to finish college first. And I feel like by the time I've finished college, I'll have had so much exposure to the French language, because I'll, like, even if I start learning another language, I'll probably still have some French content that I follow that I'll probably not actually need to live in the country to, like, get a decent level. Because my English is pretty solid, I would argue. And I've never been in an English-speaking country. Yeah. Like, that's the thing, right? It's not like I've never lived in an English-speaking country. I've never been in an English-speaking country. I've only been in one non-German-speaking country.
What, really?
Yes. I've been in Germany, I've been in Austria, which technically they speak German.
Oh, Italy.
Not very well, but...
Italy.
And I've been in Italy.
Yeah.
By the way, every single time I've been outside of the country was because of a school trip. Which, again, tells you about, like, all of the, like, big things I do with my own decision-making, right? Like, I mean, granted, back as a teenager, it would have not exactly been reasonable to leave the country on my own. And now it is more so, but I still don't have any income to finance it. So we did at one point talk about maybe like just doing a road trip thing. But
then Corona happened.
Yeah, COVID happened, and I would still be down to do something like that at one point. But also, it seems like a kind of a thing that would be a lot to plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it would probably end up costing a little bit, and it would also take a lot of time, probably, because the thing is, right, I don't want to, like, have a drive throughout all of Europe and just, like, basically just stop to sleep. That's also kind of boring.
Yeah. Like, I at least want to spend, like, maybe half a day in a couple of the bigger cities or something. Yeah. Just general couple places.
Yeah.
Just walk around, see stuff, eat food. That sort of stuff.
That is, I guess, maybe a possible plan for the future. But that's, like, more of a thing to do and not of a... Though I guess that does still count as a plan, like, right, like a thing that I'm doing. Not like a way that I'm changing my life, but a thing that I'm doing within my life. Yeah, songs of the week. How about it?
Songs of the week. Sure.
Let me pull up this. I didn't break anything this time. Okay, what is the song of the week?
Nice. I'm going with a bit. I'm memeing a bit today. And my song of the week is "Win the Race" by I Teach Later, which is a YouTube username.
The message seems very clear.
Yeah, that's just the chorus of the song. It's not just that repeating.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's from Sonic, if you couldn't tell.
I figured. It is not something that I would listen to on a regular basis. Let's put it that way.
No. Like I said, just memeing.
My song is a lot less memey. It is A Groovy Kind of Love by Phil Collins.
Nice.
Yeah. I like Phil Collins. I've always liked a lot of his music, both his personal stuff as well as with Genesis, which he was the singer of. So yeah, I mean, I have, let's just see quickly in my personal music collection, just making a point here.
Ooh.
I have 8 other Phil Collins songs on top of this one, as well as 5 Genesis songs, which in sum is a lot. Well, it's not like a lot, but like 14 songs from one artist. It's not that little. That is a point that I just made, and I clicked a thing. I really should change my shortcuts around. I've said that before. What I've also said before is that if you enjoyed this video, you should give it a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, you should leave a comment. You should subscribe. If you want to tell us something about some of the things we said, then you leave a comment. Also, feedback, greatly appreciated. Likes, dislikes, I mentioned those. Yeah, right. The Discord server. We have a Discord server. It's not really that new. You probably know about it already, but if you don't, links in the description, you can blah, blah, blah. Sergey!
That's it.
That's it.